Hello there. Decided to do something a little bit different today. I hope people can actually see my notepad well enough, but we're gonna be doing something a little bit different. So someone asked me if I could cover finite state machines and go a little bit deeper when it came to enemies, and I decided, you know what? I'm gonna make a video where it's just completely about finite state machines and easy FPS editor. So we're gonna start with the very basics first, and this I am actually looking at the wiki, and I'm gonna be adding a couple more things to this, so you can actually see how complicated some of these things end up becoming, and how you can maybe add a bit more to it, a bit more complexity to the enemies and whatnot, and certain behaviors when they get attacked and everything. Hopefully the notepad shows up properly. So on the start of FSM, it is reasonable to have the images, and my notepad is currently okay, now it's working properly. Have the images of the, in this case it's the enemy, whatever enemy name that you have, and let's say it goes to 0 to 10, for example. Actually 0 to 14. And what you generally have, and sometimes you do this in a different way when it comes afterwards, but sometimes there's sounds, sometimes not. You generally want to start with the animations first and then worry about sounds later, but you can start thinking about what sounds you want to have in the FSM. And most of the time on the idle, the idle state, you just tend to have a single frame sometimes, or it's multiple frames. But if you want, you could have something like this, for example, where it has like 2 frames, and maybe they have 0.2 seconds between each, and then already over here when it's idle. And then when the enemy sees you, they'll have a C chase. So they see you first, they're basically in their current position, and once the C state ends, it will go into that chase animation. So let's say the C is frame 3 to like frame 4, and then ready. With certain enemies, you could technically make this longer as well. There could be like enemies that have that take longer in order to actually see you, so they could run for more frames. I'm doing this in a very simple manner at the moment, though. And then you have where's that? There are chase C, but it depends, but I generally go with chase none instead, where the enemy is just chasing you. And you can do this in different ways, where normally it's like multiple frames when the enemy is kind of like walking. So you can do, I don't know, let's say that frame 0 is when they're walking. This is gonna be depending entirely on the images that you got going on your end, by the way. So you gotta pay attention to the images you have and how many images you have and which ones you're using. So at the moment I'm gonna say that this is like a really simple enemy animation, and it only goes from one frame to another when they're walking. Let's put a ready here. And the ready here is important because these readies mean that after this animation, these frames are done, it can execute a different state. So let's do a state attack chase now, for example. And let's say it goes from frame 1, not frame 1, frame 5. It's like in frame 5 for a while. And this depends entirely on your animation. Then it goes to frame 7. So let's think that this is like the enemy like winding up and then attacking you. I'm doing this entirely without looking in the, without having like an idea what the images are, what or whatever. But I'm kind of making I'm assuming, I'm making the assumption that it's done like that. And I'm gonna say that at frame 8 there's an attack, because the character does a wind up where they put like their weapon back, and then the frame 8 is when they actually hit. And then you would have frame 9. It could be ready here, and then it goes back to frame 5 at the end, for example. So this is without any sounds. And then you're gonna have, let's say, the state hurt. There's hurt flee, and that can work in certain instances. You can also do attack flee if you want the enemy to attack and then go back and then attack you again, which is also a thing. But generally, if you're going for something simpler, you go for state hurt chase, so it goes back to the chase scene after it gets hurt. And here's the other thing. So let's suppose that there's 2 different frames for when the enemy gets hurt. So let's say that there's only 2 frames, like these ones. But then let's say, and this is where things can get a bit more complicated. Let's make the assumption that you have different weapons in the game, and different weapons cause the enemy to get stunned for different amounts of time. The way that he would do this is by doing this. First, we're gonna do this, making a couple of these. And the important thing about the engine when it comes to easy first-person editor, if it's something that's under 001, the engine skips these, but it can run whatever commands you have over here. So for example, we're gonna do jump if equals global player weapon 1, and we're gonna have another one down here if global player 2. Now the important thing about this is that this is not gonna work unless this global player weapon is actually, you have like a set var on a different FSM, and you would do that, you would do set var global player weapon 1 on the weapon frames that you're using, specifically when you're using the attack state. That's what you would do. Now with this, what we can do is as follows. So the normal attack, if it's not using any weapon, or if it's not registering any of these variables, it's going to use this one by default. But if we said we wanted to do, I don't know, let's imagine the first weapon is a club. So let's call it club hurt. We're going to have club hurt over here. We're gonna take these off over here, and we're gonna make another one, which is let's say knife. A knife weapon. Let's say the second weapon is a knife, so it would be knife hurt. Now what this is gonna do, if on the FSM of the weapon you have set var global.player weapon 1, when the enemy gets hurt over here, it's gonna jump immediately to this state. And let's say the club actually stuns them longer, so you would do something like this. You could have it maybe 1.15, whereas the knife would stun not as long, maybe for 0.0, right? And you can pretty much do this for any other weapon that you do. If you added another weapon, let's say, let's have a sword here. Maybe the sword wouldn't hit as long. Or maybe it would hit between like the club and the knife in terms of the stun. So this is kind of what I do with the state hurts. I think of it as a way to change the amount of frames or durations of the frames that the enemy needs to cycle through before they are capable of doing another action again. So this makes it useful for like if you have a weapon like the club that can stun them longer, maybe it doesn't deal as much damage, but maybe it basically prevents them from attacking you. You can give all sorts of different behaviors to the weapon that way. And the other cool about this, and let's see if we can do that now, is if we go to the state def 0, is that so we have 3 more frames. So let's say the def frames are the 12. And we're gonna do this for now. I'm gonna do exactly the same thing that I did before, and I'll explain why. I'm gonna say that the last 4 frames are for the death animation. So now we need a state dead none 0 frame 1400 none. Now with this, again, we can do the same thing we did before. So we have 3 weapons. This needs to be a tree over here. So make sure that when you're doing this, you need to have a set for on your weapon that you're using when you're attacking, or else this is not going to do jack shit. Because it's going to assume this is 0 because there's no value on it. So with this, you can do the same thing here. We're actually going to copy this at the moment, and then we're going to make changes. Now, the other thing is, try not have... I don't know if these are supposed to be like commands. I'm just calling them commands because it's none, does nothing here on the frame, but don't use the first one if you can, because I believe it generally does not do anything. Like easy first-person editor kind of skips it. But yeah, and then what you want to do is this. So let's say this is club. I also need to change this to knife. Actually, take this off, because we're going to change the names on this, or else it's going to jump to the previous states, and we don't want that, because that will prevent them from dying. We will want to do this. We have about these many. So we have knife def, and we have sword def. Take this off. Knife def, sword def. So now we're gonna have club def over here, knife def over here, and sword def over here. Now you might think that there's not much of a purpose to having a different state for each one of the weapons when the enemies die, but the thing is, I generally used the sounds related to the weapon that I'm using when it gets hit on the enemy state instead. So for example, when the enemy gets hit by the club, sometimes I do this, which is I add a couple more of these frames over here, and I make sure that they're under 001, so they're pretty much instant. And then I have the sound over here, and it could be sound 0, for example, or sound 1. So I have the sounds all the way over here. It could be sound example 1, sound example 2, sound example 3, sound example 4, and so on. But then I have like the sounds over here as well. But you're better off organizing the way that you prefer. because if you're doing the same things as someone else, you need to kind of understand how they're organizing things, or else you're gonna mess things up. So the cool thing about, and going back to this, to having different deaths, is that you can have certain weapons actually have the enemy drop down faster, or even instantaneously. And it might not seem like much, and not just allowing you to have the added sounds of the weapon hitting the enemy as well on their death, but also allowing you to have them have faster deaths or even slower deaths dependently. For example, the club death might actually give them a slower death animation, while the knife death might make them drop really fast in comparison. And when you don't have a body in front of you, it's another thing that's not blocking your melee hits and also your bullets. And the faster they die, they stop becoming an obstacle for your weapons, your melee weapons, and your range weapons altogether. So that's something to keep in mind. Looking back at this, and I'm gonna add a little something over here. Let's have an attack that kind of changes itself after the enemy has attacked a few times. And the way that he would do it is, for example, by using the increment command. And let me just make sure I am doing this right by going into the wiki again. So let's say increment, and this we don't need a global variable. It can be a non-global variable or map variable, because the variable is inside the finite state machine of this enemy. So let's say enemy, let's say it's combo. And we're gonna say that it increases combo by value 1. And we're also gonna do this as well. I'm just gonna add an additional frame here, and I'm actually gonna put this here instead. And I'm gonna have a jump if equals combo tree to attack combo. And now I'm gonna do another attack over here. I'm gonna call it attack combo. And when the combo is 1, it will go here. We're gonna have a decrement combo tree over here, so it reduces it back to 3. So whenever it does this, whenever it goes from this attack to this one, it will reset to 0. And it will do a different attack. And I don't know exactly what, a difference between this normal attack and this attack and this one. It could be that this attack is just faster, just a faster attack, for example. So this kind of changes the enemy patterns a little bit, sort of. But you could also play with the idea of doing something a little bit different. Like, for example, let me check. I haven't used projectile in a while, but I've used it before. If absolute angle will be relative to player's direction. You could have explosion or projectile, so you would do... I would recommend checking how this one works, for example, but you could have projectile, and so it's 4 different values. 0 is directly at the player. 180 is directly away from absolute is 1. Angle will be exact direction in the world. Okay, so absolute, it doesn't matter. Height, spread, so yeah. You could have this, for example, and then you could have it set it up so this is kind of instantaneous. So you'd have like something like this. You would have like the projectile being shot at different angles. if that makes sense. And these would get shot at the same time, since this was be instantaneous. So this would fire multiple projectiles. There's also another option. You could do a thing that I've done before. Let me see, where's the spawn? Spawn. You could have an enemy spawn instead. Spawn, and I don't know, I don't have like an example of an enemy here, but I'm just gonna put enemy X. Whatever name that you have of the enemy or an item or entity. In this case, it will be an enemy or decoration. So enemy X, and then you have X, Y, Z, just like with particles, and then front velocity. Let's say that X, Y, Z. X, Y, Z, Z is up. So I think in order for it to be in front of you, you would have, I don't know, spawning like this maybe. And then with front velocity 30, for example. So this would spawn an enemy every time it reaches combo tree, which instead of a normal attack. So this is an idea of something that he can do. So as you can see, there are ways of changing like the enemy behavior a little bit. Another thing you could do, besides this, to change the animator a little bit, is still keep it as an attack and make it fast still. And you could actually include a flee here. And it's flee chase. Could be a flee chase. You could have a flee chase, and then you have the attack combo after using it actually flee. So so attack 1, 2, 3. Then enemy attacks faster, and then he flees for a little bit, which lasts as long as your state flee. So that's an idea. So you can still do quite a bit. So yeah, I'm gonna leave this notepad as this. It might give you like a couple of ideas for what to do in terms of the finite state machine when it comes to like enemies. It went a bit deeper in terms of like some ways you can change up how some attacks work, the duration of the hurt states and custom hurt states, and also the enemy deaths as well. So I would just say experiment and try different things and mix in with variables and other things. And I hope this ends up helping out a little bit, hopefully.